Hi everyone and welcome to Tozan Tips. Whoa! Tozan Tips. This is the first of a two-part series about guidebooks. Today's focus is on English language hiking guidebooks for Japan. If you're looking for English language hiking guidebooks for Japan, there are a few that are still in print. Today I will talk about those, as well as ones from former times that are completely out of print. I moved to Japan in March of 2001, just after this guidebook came out. This is the original first edition of Lonely Planet's Hiking in Japan. This is not the first English language hiking guidebook for Japan. If you want to truly talk about the first guidebook, you have to go all the way back to 1881 in the Meiji era, when Sir Ernest Sato released a handbook for travelers in central and northern Japan. He wrote this book with his partner A.G.S. Hawes, and it was published in 1881. This is the guidebook that a lot of the original explorers of the Meiji era of Japan used. Walter Weston used this book to travel around. Sato's guidebook was updated and reprinted in 1884 and features a lot of ascents of Japan's mountains. During that time, Japan was just opening up to foreign visitors and diplomats after being in relative isolation for the 400 years of the Edo era. After Sato's book was published, there wasn't really much published, but that all changed with this book, Paul Hunt's Hiking in Japan. This book came out in 1988 on Kodansha, a publisher that is no longer in business. It's a completely black and white book with lots of practical hiking information, very basic black and white maps to a lot of mountains in Japan, from Kyushu all the way up to Hokkaido. This book is long out of print. You can probably find it on eBay. Paul Hunt's Hiking in Japan book was followed a few years later by this very rare book by Michael Plastow called Exploring Kiryu, Ashio, and Nikko, Mountain Walks in the Land of Shodo Shonin. This was published on Weatherhill. I really have no idea how I got my hands on this book. I didn't buy it. It was gifted to me somehow in the last 20 years when I was living in Osaka. I think an old roommate had it and moved out. This book is chock full of information about hikes in Tochigi and Gunma prefectures primarily. So after these two books went out of print, there was really nothing until these two books came along. Lonely Planet released their Hiking in Japan at the beginning of 2001. So this is the book where I actually learned about the Hyakumeizan. It's broken down by region. It's basically a black and white book with an accent color in brown. And the maps are very, very basic, not the best maps to use when you're actually on the mountain. But at that time, it was kind of enough if you supplemented it with Japanese maps. This book was a wealth of information. Unfortunately, it went out of print, but we were saved by a second edition. This came out in 2009 as the second edition. It's very similar to the first edition. Biggest difference is the accent color is red instead of brown. After these books went out of print, there was nothing on the market for a long time until this one came along. This is actually, it's not a guidebook per se, but it's a translation of Fukara Kyuya's Hyakumeizan. This was translated by Martin Hood. This book was released in 2015 on the University of Hawaii Press. And it's basically a translation of Fukara's original Japanese book. It features descriptions of all the 100 mountains of Japan, as well as an extensive introduction that covers a lot of historical information about the founding fathers of Japanese mountaineering. It's a very fascinating read. It'll give you a lot of background information about the mountains. So when you do use guidebooks, they will help to provide a little bit of context. Between 2015 and 2019, there was nothing on the market until British publisher Cicerone came out with a couple of books for Japan's mountains. This is Japan's Kumanokoro pilgrimage book, written by Kat Davis. Unfortunately, she is no longer with us, but her memory lives on. This is an excellent guide to the Nakahechi and the Kohechi routes of the Kumano-Kodo. Full color maps with vertical elevation charts as well. It's thoroughly researched and very well written and concise guide, available from Cicerone's website. At the same time that this came out, my own guidebook came out, co-authored with Tom Fay, called Hiking and Trekking the Japan Alps and Mount Fuji. This was released in 2019. It covers all of the northern, central, and southern Alps. It's a comprehensive guidebook, 400 pages worth of information, featuring a full color guidebook with vertical elevation charts, as well as maps for every route in the book. Both Tom and I researched this and personally hiked all of the routes in this book. And when it came out in 2019, it was the most up-to-date information. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic hit. The hikes themselves are still very up-to-date. Some of the mountain hut information, prices have gone up considerably, as well as now huts require reservations to stay, whereas before the pandemic, you can just walk into any hut and show up and get a place to stay. So now it's a little bit harder to just show up without a booking. The great thing about Cicerone is they keep their guidebooks in print as long as there is a demand for the books. And with every reprint of the book, the authors are given a chance to make changes. So Tom and I actually keep this book continually updated. The next time that it needs a reprint, when we sell out of the current printing, there will be even more up-to-date information. So that's kind of the advantage of these new guides from Cicerone. With all the Cicerone guides, they come in a paperback and an ebook version. So if you're eco-conscious and you want to get something to use on your reader, you can download the ebook. One thing that Cicerone provides for most of their guidebooks, especially for this one which we wrote, you can download all of the GPX files for every single walk and hike in this book by going directly to Cicerone's website. The link is in the description below. So once the Cicerone books came out, these were the only guidebooks in print in English for mountains in Japan. Lonely Planet jumped back on the bandwagon after this went out of print. In 2021, they released, I would consider this kind of the unspoken third edition of the Lonely Planet Hiking in Japan. This is Best Day Walks Japan with 60 walks throughout Japan. They've kind of updated to a full color version with full colored maps. The biggest difference I would say between maybe these guidebooks and say something like this is the Cicerone guidebooks. Everything is done completely by the authors. All of the photographs were taken personally by the authors. All the information is written, all the maps were co-designed with the authors and the publisher. Unfortunately, for this guidebook, Lonely Planet has kind of switched from previously guides like this, where most of the images were author supplied. Almost everything in this book is relying on stock photos. So sometimes the photos don't actually represent what you would actually see on the hike, because people that chose these stock photos don't live in Japan and they're working in some design office. Details about all of these guidebooks are in the description of this video, as well as links to ones that are currently still in print. Well, today I talked a little bit about English language guidebooks to Japan's mountains. There will be a follow-up series coming up about Japanese language guidebooks to Japan's mountains, for which there is a plethora of guidebooks if you can read and understand Japanese. That's it for episode number 2 of Tozan Tips. Thanks for watching.